Hi, and welcome to SunnySpeak. My name is Lisa Valianti O'Brien, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our program today. Ask anyone in America where they were on September 11th, 2001, and they will surely be able to tell you exactly where they were. The day stands out as one of the most tragic in our American history, and the images from that day will be forever etched in our minds. What many do not know, however, is that during that day of destruction, as people fled the Twin Towers for their lives, there was a young man fighting his way back into the blazing heat and stifling smoke of the South Tower. Survivors say this young man carried a woman on his back as he offered them words of hope and encouragement, directing them down nearly 28 flights of stairs, only to announce, "I'm going back up." This decision, a selfless act of courage, cost him the ultimate price, his very own life. The survivors didn't know their rescuer's name that day, but recalled that he wore a red bandana. Almost 9 months later, after reading their accounts in the news, Alison Crowther felt certain the man in the red bandana was her son Wells. Who is Wells Crowther, and why would a young man with his whole life ahead of him sacrifice his very own life for total strangers? Please join us at Boston College as we find out the answers to these questions and more, when I have the honor of speaking with Alison Crowther about the life and legacy of her son Wells, the hero with the red bandana. Hi, Alison, and welcome to SunnySpeak. Thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Lisa. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here.
You know, at the open, we spoke about Wells's courageous action on 9/11, but before we get into that day, can we talk a little bit maybe about his growing up and how he was as a youth, so we can get a little background about his personality?
I love to talk about Wells at any age, but as a child, as a baby, he was very curious and very aware, very always exploring. I'll never forget one time when he took me over. He must have been 3 or maybe 4, but I think he was 3, and he walked over to our window and looked out at the moon. My husband had always been saying, "Turn out the lights, turn out the lights, you know, you're wasting electricity." So Wells brought me over and he said, "Mommy, is anybody at home on the moon?" And I said, "No, Wells, nobody's at home on the moon. Nobody lives there." He said, "Well, they left the lights on." So I thought, that is so adorable. And he always had those wonderful different ways of looking, very imaginative, very bright. He was very protective of his younger sisters. His sister Honor was 2 years younger. And we have some wonderful photos of him holding her, giving her kisses as a tiny baby. And then 5 years after Honor arrived, his baby sister Paige arrived, and he was very proud of Paige as well. He loved his sisters and was very caring of them.
Tell me, what town did you raise the family in New York?
We grew up in, the children grew up in Upper Nyack. We had moved over to Rockland County for business for my husband. My husband and I both grew up in Westchester County, which is across the Hudson River. So we traveled west, and that's where we settled. And it was a wonderful town for our children to be raised. A very diverse community, but very warm community. Lots of very interesting people in the arts, in education, in science and medicine. And some business people too. I mean, it was just a nice mix, and a range of, our children grew up with other youngsters who came from simpler homes, from single family homes, and you know, not very wealthy homes. And there was everything from the projects to estates overlooking the Hudson River that all mixed up in Nyack. And as a result, their experience was very diversified, and all of them had a wonderful understanding of people of all different backgrounds.
That's nice. Now tell me, what did he look like as a young boy? What was Wells, how would you describe his physical characteristics?
Bouncing. That's my first thought. He was always leaping through the air. He was always, he was a natural athlete, and he loved movement. He, a little towhead boy, and just always smiling. He was always smiling. He was always happy.
Did he have some certain games that he liked to play? Like, what were his favorite pastimes?
When he was young, he was fascinated by G.I. Joe things. And so he used to play a lot with G.I. Joe. He would wear camouflage out somewhere, I don't know, must have gotten it for a birthday present or Christmas or something, camouflage outfit. And he had a friend, John, who he played with also, and I would come home and find them up a tree. We had a very tall pine tree one time. I mean, 100 feet tall, it's a huge pine tree. And I came home and I'm looking around, calling for Wells, and I hear his voice. He goes, "Hi, Mom, hi, Mom, hi, Mom." Yeah. I was looking everywhere. And he said, "I'm up here." And I looked up, and he was so far up in this tree. He must have been 50 feet off the ground. It was but he made it down.
Spirit of adventure.
Very much so, yes.
No, I remember seeing a photo too with his little fire truck. He had an interest, didn't he, in since a young age, really, in being a fireman. Is that true?
Well, yes, he was fascinated by fire trucks. He had two grandfathers, my husband's father and my father, loved to take Wells to visit the local fire stations. And so he was very fascinated by the red, it's red, it's all Wells. He was fascinated by that and the sirens and the excitement. My husband was a volunteer firefighter, and when we moved to Upper Nyack, he joined Empire Hook and Ladder Company. Wells was about 7 at the time, and so Wells used to come with my husband down to the firehouse and help out, hang out with the other firefighters and some of their children. It's a generational thing in Upper Nyack. Their families, one family, the Wanamaker family, who's had many generations of Wanamakers in the fire company. And in fact, Harry Wanamaker was one of the firefighters. He was a member of FDNY and was one of the firefighters, several other Wanamakers also, who fought the fires at Ground Zero. But Harry's the one. Yeah, Harry's the one. He was skipper of the John D. McCain, the fireboat, that fought the fires down at Ground Zero when the attacks happened.
Oh my goodness, unbelievable. Now, at a certain juncture, Wells decided to attend school at Boston College. What made him decide to come to this area?
I really don't know. Boston College, of course, is fabulous, and we were working with a consultant, an educational consultant, on looking for the right kind of colleges for Wells. And he had said to Wells, when he first met Wells, "Would you like to go to Columbia?" Because he had a particular pull and involvement at Columbia, and he could have gotten Wells into Columbia. And he said, "No, sir, no, thank you. I don't want to be in New York City, and I'm looking for Division I lacrosse college."
Okay.
That
so
was a big
sports
that was
connection there.
So I took Wells around to about 25 different colleges, looking up and down the East Coast. Wonderful schools everywhere we went. And BC was the last school we visited, just because that's how it happened.
Geographically, right?
Yeah, well, I guess. We were up in Maine, we were down to North Carolina, we were in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, we were all over. At any rate, so he wakes up. Wells spent a lot of time sleeping on these trips. I was driving, he was sleeping. So we drove along Commonwealth Avenue, and he perks up and he says, "Oh, we were in Newton." And he said, "Oh, Mom, this looks like a lot like where Grandma and Grandpa lived. My parents lived in Scarsdale, that's where I grew up, and it's very much like Newton." And so that piqued his interest. And then we drove past Linden Lane, which is where the start of the Red Bandanna Run is now. And he looked down Linden Lane, this beautiful lane, and the beautiful college buildings, and he said, "Well, this is the place for me. I said, Wells, how do you know that? We haven't even stepped foot on the campus or heard anything about how do you know that? He says, I don't know, Mom. I just know this is the place for me.
He got the feeling, and that was it, right?
Yeah.
And he never really had any regrets, did
Never.
he, after
He
that?
loved it. He was so happy here.
Yeah, what did he do? What were some of his involvements on campus?
Well, largely lacrosse. You know,
yeah,
that's
that
very
takes a demanding schedule, isn't
very
it? Yeah.
demanding. In fact, when he first was on the Newton campus, when he first came in the fall, and he had a bicycle with him, so he would get up and try to bicycle at 5 o'clock in the morning for lacrosse practices, or to take the bus. And fortunately, they transferred him here to the main campus in the winter, so that made that much easier. But it was very time-consuming, but wonderful. It was a wonderful family for Wells here, and still to this day, he has wonderful friends that have remained loyal and to us and supportive, and always supportive of Wells, anything
nice.
Wells, which has been great. So he did that. He also did varsity athletes against, no, I'm sorry, no. He did the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which is a program here that is an outreach to underprivileged youngsters to teach them lacrosse also. So that was
Nice.
something happening. And he partied. He loved to
Yeah,
party.
And I understand he did a great sense of humor, right?
Oh,
because
very
there were
funny.
a few little stories that I had heard. Yes.
Yes, very funny. One of my funniest memories is when we were all sitting around it wasn't the dining room table, it was the kitchen table. We were having a family dinner with my husband and myself and Wells and his two younger sisters. One of the things he said that I just loved was, and this was after he started working at Sandler O'Neill, one of them was, you know, Honor and Paige, he said, Mom was right. And I thought, well, this is going to be good. Yes, manners are very important when you grow up and when you get into the working world. It's very, very important to have proper manners. So I thought that was just great. I loved that. But the funny story I particularly remember was when we were all sitting around the table as a family, and my husband, for some reason, was lecturing us about something we'd done wrong. I don't know. He was just so angry and just lecturing. And Wells got up. My husband could be very stern. Wells got up and he walked around the table and he went to the fruit bowl that was behind, in the chest behind the table, and he picked up 2 bananas and held them above my husband's head like horns. And like devil horns.
Right.
And we all started laughing. My husband had no idea.
He didn't know. It was all happening behind the scenes,
but
right?
it was just great. It was so Wells.
Spontaneous
and
yeah,
creative and just wonderful.
Yeah. Now, do you remember when he got the news about getting his job at the World Trade Center? Do you remember that time?
Oh, I do. He was so excited. He was just, it was his dream come true. He had always wanted to be in business. We had visited the World Trade Center years ago when a friend of, a young man came down from Massachusetts as an exchange program for, it was for Pop Warner football, I believe. And so we all took a little field trip in and up to the top of the, one of the buildings. I don't remember which one, the World Trade Center. And I think Wells was just so fascinated by that. He was young. He was, I don't know, 8 or 9, maybe 10. And he just was so fascinated that I think that was part of the seed. But he always talked about being in business. And he would play these games with my husband's father, who was retired. They'd play Office. When he was little, 3 years old, they'd be playing Office. There with his glasses. It was just darling. So he had that in his mind. He was an economics major here at BC. And he did an internship at Sandler O'Neill.
Oh, okay.
The summer before his junior year. And he enjoyed that very much, and I think because of that internship, it kind of smoothed the way. They liked him. They liked his work ethic. He said, this was very telling of Wells also, one of the people that hired him said, well, Wells, this is an internship, so you're going to work, but we're not going to pay you. And Wells said, well, sir, that's all right. The experience will be very valuable. And And the man like patted him on the back, I think, and said, "That's great, Wells." He said, "Of course we're going to pay you, but that's the right attitude."
He passed the test, right?
Yeah. So during the day, my husband and Wells would often have conversations while they were both at work. One day, Wells called my husband and said, "Dad, is it raining down where you are?" And my husband said, "Yes, it's pouring." He said, "Well, not up here. The sun is shining I'm above the clouds. The sun is shining here, and I'm looking down on helicopters." That was one of his fascinations about
Being
working.
at the Trade Center and being so high up in a different stratosphere.
That's right.
Yeah. You know, I wanted to ask you too. Everyone remembers where they were on 9/11, and I'm sure it's not easy to talk about it as many times as you've spoken about it. So we really appreciate you going back in time for us here to kind of paint the day through your eyes. Could you take us through that day, how things unfolded?
Yes,
that
I
would
can.
be meaningful if you
Yes,
could.
I can.
Yeah.
I was at work I couldn't sleep the night before. Something was making me very unhappy, nervous. I just was sure this was sort of a premonition I think I was having, that something very terrible was going to happen. So I didn't sleep all night. I got up the next morning. I said to myself, well, I'll go work out. I belonged to a fitness club. I worked over in Westchester. I was vice president of sales for a company in Westchester. And so I was on the Tappan Zee Bridge driving across it when I had a huge premonition about something so terrible that I was going to die. That was the message to me, that I was going to die that day.
Oh my goodness.
So I kept driving. I was very objective about it. I said, well, it's meant to happen. It's supposed to happen. I wonder how it's going to happen. Anyway, it's better than what I've been going through. And I thought, wait a minute, well, how can death be better than... I was planning a sales meeting for my company. After this great aha, and I was at complete serene and utter peace.
You were.
That I was going to die. All right, well, I wonder how it's going to happen. Oh, well. I thought maybe I'd better call the doctor when I get to work, because why should I be so anxious? I mean, that was my rational mind trying to fight back and say, what was this all about? I had no concept that this was a premonition of anything coming, really. I mean, it was just a message. I just received it, and that was it. That was about 7 o'clock in the morning of September 11th, as I was driving across the Tappan Zee Bridge. So I went through reservoirs to take a nice peaceful shortcut to keep going on my way to Briarcliff Manor, and that morning there were thousands of up-spiraling mists on either side of me, and I drove through that, and I said, well, that was about 7:15. I said, well, I do know this much. This is a very evil day today. Oh, well, I'm going to die anyway. I wonder how it's going to happen. I just was completely objective about it. It was very strange. So I went and worked out. I must have left at about 9:15. So I missed any reporting of the incident because I was leaving just about as things were happening.
Okay.
I didn't have my radio on in the car, and it was a shop I worked in, so they didn't have a television. It wasn't, they had an old radio they finally got going. But I was sitting with my boss, and we started working on planning the sales meeting, and the phone rang, and my boss answered, and she said, "It's for you, it's your husband's secretary." Well, my husband had stayed home that day because he was going to a golf outing.
Okay.
So I thought something must have happened to him. So I go pick up to speak with the secretary, and the secretary said, Alison, Wells just called. He wants me to tell you that he's okay. I said, Wells? Well, why wouldn't he be okay? And she said, don't you know? I said, no, what? She said, the plane has hit the World Trade Center.
Oh my.
So now I'm getting chills.
Oh.
So I said, I had, no, we haven't heard anything. And of course, as everyone else was thinking that day, oh, it must have been a private plane, too bad for them. And then the second plane was hit, my boss's husband was a stockbroker, but he wasn't based down in the World Trade Center. So he was clear of that mess, and I guess she was talking to him. That's when people in our shop found this old radio and got it going, and that's when they heard the new, and so I walked out to hear what was going on, and they just all were standing there looking at me ashen. And they're the ones that heard that the first tower had collapsed.
And we should say that Wells was in the south tower. The first tower to go down was the north tower, is that correct?
No, the first tower was the south tower to go down.
Okay.
The first tower hit was the north tower.
Okay.
The
Thank
first
you.
tower to come down, because it was hit lower. It was hit about the 78th to up to the 81st floor or something. That's because the plane came in at an angle, so it cut the building. The north tower was completely cut through, so nobody above the impact could escape. In the south tower, the plane came down the Hudson and banked around. That's how they came to they didn't have navigational skills, these people. They took flying lessons and said, just teach us how to fly these planes. We don't need to know how to land. That's what they were saying to the instructors. You know, I mean, really? So there was that big question mark about why something wasn't investigated earlier. But anyway, so this second plane came from Boston, flew down the Hudson River and banked around to hit the south tower. And in banking, it was on an angle, so that left the one stairwell open, that because it was protected by the shafts of the elevators interior in the middle of the building.
Okay.
And that's how Wells was able to rescue people.
I guess we should start with how you first learned of your son's demise. I mean, did you have to wait days? When those people were there with their ashen faces, did you know immediately? Did you get a feeling?
Oh, I had a feeling he was gone. I
Did
called,
you?
yes, not even knowing what tower it was. I called my husband. I said, Jeff, Wells is gone. He said, don't say that. He had plenty of skills to get down. We don't know what tower it was. He was in what tower came down first, because it was very early on, you know.
Yes.
But I knew, in my heart of hearts, I knew
You
that.
did.
Yeah, and so my colleagues drove me home. Our daughter Honor was working at the time and living with her boyfriend up in a private estate up in northern Westchester, and he drove her home. He drove her coming across the Tappan Zee Bridge. He drove the car right in tandem with a big, huge tractor trailer, so Honor couldn't see the smoke.
Oh, how thoughtful.
Oh, he's wonderful.
How thoughtful.
He's so wonderful. Both of our son-in-laws were so blessed. They're beautiful men. Anyway, and then Rick rolled up his sleeves and stayed at our home and worked like crazy, because we had people coming over. I don't know. He helped do things.
You probably don't remember some
Well,
of it.
I was in shock.
Of course you were.
Yeah, I was in shock. I didn't eat for days. I just drank water and walked. I had to walk. So we didn't know. I mean, my husband, we went down the first night to go to where they were evacuating people.
Yes.
Hoping to see, maybe find Wells, you know, wrapped up in a unconscious or something with no identification.
Of course, you're going to hope for that.
Yeah, and we got there and there was nobody there. There were just some media trucks, and it was deserted. And I looked at that and I said, well, you know what? People either walked over or they died in this scene. They either there were, you know, people that were hospitalized, but it was
That must
just
have been
devastating.
a terrible
So
moment.
we learned later that some of Wells's friends went to the different hospitals and put on hospital gowns, you know, doctor's coats.
So they could,
and,
did they try
and went
to,
around looking to find Wells. I mean, you know, under normal circumstances, that'd be a terrible thing to do, but they were so brave to do that,
Yes,
and they were
they
just
just-
trying to find their friend, and it was so chaotic. It was terrible. But even the hospitals were prepared for thousands of people to help.
Survivors.
And really, there were not that many. You either walked off or you had, you know, they took care of the people that needed to be cared for. But
Now, there were heroics that happened, we know this, and tell us, first of all, the importance of that red bandana, the meaning of that, and then maybe you can take us through how the connection was made that your son was this great hero.
well, when Wells was a little boy, my husband was getting him dressed for church. My husband always carried bandanas, and Wells had a little suit on, and he said, and he said to my husband, "Daddy, can I have a handkerchief like that? Can I have a bandana too?" So my husband said, "Sure, Wells," and he went and pulled out a red bandana out of his drawer. But he folded up a white handkerchief and he put it in Wells's pocket and said, "All right, Wells, this white handkerchief, that's for show. Don't touch that. Leave it there. It's neatly folded. Here, this bandana, it's for messy jobs, to blow your nose."
That's weird.
And he put that in Wells's back pocket. And that's how it all started. My husband happened to give him a red one. My husband kept the blue ones. And it just stayed that way. So in the laundry, we could tell which bandanas belonged to whom.
Now, for a little boy to keep a bandana, for how many years did Wells hold?
All the rest of his life.
I mean, even at work, he would take this bandana out and put it on his desk. People knew that he had it.
That's right.
What would he explain? Why did he have this? What was his explanation?
Well, he always he always carried that bandana with him, and he was teased about it at work. I guess he was always teased about it, but teasing never bothered Wells.
Okay.
He was teased as a boy and bullied actually as a boy. We never learned that until much later because he never showed any upset to us. But because he was much smaller than the rest of his friends, he grew later, but he was much smaller. People, they tended to tease him.
Pick on him, huh?
And so he had a way of dealing with that. So, it just was he kind of was amused by the fact, I think, that people noticed and wondered. But there is a story that somebody at work said, "Wells, what are you doing with that thing? Why do you still carry that bandana?" Even I asked that, because we had dinner with Wells the Sunday before the weekend of September 11th. And we're walking across the street to go to dinner, and he pulls out a bandana wrapped around his comb and his wallet. And I said, "Wells, are you still carrying that thing? You're on Wall Street now. You're working on Wall Street. You're a businessman, and you still carry that thing?" And he looked at me and he smiled. And he says, "Yeah, Mom." And I said, "Well, you're just like your father." And I could see that he just loved that. He just loved it. But anyway, about the bandana, he used to keep it on his desk at work. I learned. I didn't even know that until I think Tom Rinaldi wrote about that in his book.
Right. And
one day he picked it up and he said to the girl, he said, "What are you doing with that?" He said, "With this bandana, I'm going to change the world."
Oh, what a prophetic statement to make. So survivors started to talk, didn't they? They went to the media, and they were talking about, there was a commonality, and that was that the person that helped escort them out, brought them, saved them, rescued them, brought them to the stair, had a red bandana. So can you tell us about some of these survivors and what you learned through them about your son?
I can.
Who ultimately, as we said at the top of the show, ultimately gave the biggest gift of all, his own life, for total strangers, people that he did not even know.
Yeah. Well, we didn't know what happened to Wells for a very long time, and you'd mentioned earlier how long did it take. We heard nothing, we received nothing, and finally, after time, you come to realize you need to have a memorial service because he's not coming home. That took about 2 weeks. And it was a very hard thing to do without a body, without the proof. It was almost as if we were abandoning Wells. It was very bad feeling, but we really had to do it. My mother was asking for a service. His cousin was about to have a baby, so we had to, take that. So we had this memorial service. Then Wells's body was recovered in the 19th of March, 2002. And that was actually another thing I knew was going to come, because we'd heard that it was when they moved the ramp down into the pit that the trucks and everything went down to excavate and do the recovery effort. They moved that ramp that had been there and put in the larger, more permanent ramp. And when I heard that was happening that week, I said, "Jeff, they're going to find Wells this week."
Oh,
I just knew.
You felt that, yep.
And sure enough, they did.
They did.
Anyway, so I started reading this article in the New York Times where it was a big story about putting together like a jigsaw puzzle, and that's something else I knew that first day looking at this, that it's going to be like putting together a big jigsaw puzzle of all the different things happening in those towers. So they put together a story. It was Fighting to Live as the Towers Died. And that was the basis of the big book that was written on 9/11. I got to a section. My husband actually saw the headlines in the Times and said he couldn't read anything. He couldn't watch videos.
It was too painful for him.
And I had always been looking, searching for Wells. So he gave it to me. I went and sat and read, and I came to this section that said 903 in the South Tower Sky Lobby. And I said, well, if I'm going to read anything or see anything about Wells, it's going to be here, because we knew he'd gotten down. He had to have passed through the Sky Lobby before the tower collapsed, because he was found with a group of the incident commander, Donald Burns. He was found with Donald Burns and his men of the FDNY and one other civilian. So, and they actually, we were told, had a Jaws of Life tool, and they were planning to go back up into the building to cut people out of elevators and whatever. And that's when the towers came down. It was like a big bellows, and it basically blew them as a group out and up against the wall of 4 World Trade, and that's where they dropped, and that's where he was found, right under the ramp. So we knew he was found. We knew he had to get down to the bottom, and so I started reading in this section, because I knew if there was going to be anything, it would be there. And suddenly I saw it. I saw these references to this mysterious man with a red handkerchief, referencing a red bandana, covering his face, calling out commands like, there are people here you can help. There are people here you cannot help. Only help those you can help. Get up and follow me now. Follow me, I know the way. So there was somebody with a red bandana, and there was somebody with firematic skills. He was a trained emergency service person to be able to have the presence of mind to call out and organize escape. And it was 2 different people. And so I said, this is Wells. I just knew. I just felt in my heart.
Yes,
I knew
2
in my
different
heart.
people saying the same thing, right?
Yeah. I just knew it had to be. I went running out to my husband. I said, look, Jeff, I found Wells. Here he is, here he is. And my husband, very practical man, said, don't get your hopes. He says, no, really? No, don't get your hopes up. Just, nah. So I said, well, I'm going to track him down. So the next day, that was Monday, Memorial Day, Monday. The next day, I started making calls. I called the reporters from the Times that wrote the articles. Only one got back to me, and nothing really ever...
Really?
Nothing ever happened from that. Then I called. I couldn't find Ling Young.
Yeah, so Ling Young was one of the...
Was one.
Yes.
And Judy Ween was the other. But in the article, it mentioned that Judy Ween worked for Aon. So I called Aon on Tuesday morning, and they said, well, Judy Ween doesn't work here anymore. I said, well, I don't expect you to give me her telephone number, but here's mine, my name, and here's my number, and I think that it was our son that might have saved her, and I would love to contact her. So sure enough, by the end of the day, she called me. I sent photographs back and forth, and the 2, Ling and Judy, talked, because they had kept a group email. There had been, of the hundreds of people waiting for, a couple hundred people probably waiting for the elevators, there were only 18 survivors of the Sky Lobby, and only one died. So there were only 17, and they kept a communication group email going between each other. So they reached out.
And can you define where the Sky Lobby was, just for our viewers?
Sure. The Sky Lobby, in the World Trade Center, because it was so high, 110 floors, hugely high, there were express elevators up to, in the South Tower, up to the 78th floor that they called the Sky Lobby.
The 78th floor.
Yes.
Okay.
And so you could take an express elevator up to the 78th and then take local elevators up to the higher levels. And that's because Wells worked on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. That's where he was coming down. So he had to have been in the lobby at about the time the plane hit, because there were also reports from friends of his that they'd spoken to him at about little before 9 o'clock. So we weren't sure where. Maybe he was in his office, maybe not. But we do know he was with another volunteer firefighter coming down, worked in this company, coming down to help the scene at the first tower that was hit. So so that got him in motion, and he was obviously, I think, I speculate that because the damage and people were so hugely injured in the sky lobby, that Wells might have been right by the door in the stairwell, entering, maybe about to enter the sky lobby when the plane hit, so he might have been protected because the women he saved said he showed no signs of injury or any, I mean, it was just miraculous.
But he said to them, I'm going back up.
Yeah.
Why do you think he did that?
Well, that's because that's who he was. You know, it just was who Wells was. He was a fully trained firefighter. They're emergency service personnel. It's their mission. It's what they do. And he just was doing his job. That was it. He took off his equities trader hat and he put on his firefighter's hat and saved lives. He went from the 78th floor sky lobby where he found Ling Young first, and she was burned over 40% of her body. Poor thing. He escorted her, he put a woman over his shoulder, carried her down to about the 61st floor where there was clear air and lights were still on. And Wells said, I think you're going to be okay, you go on down. He put the woman down. He said, you better keep going. I have to go back up. There are more people I have to save. So he went back up from the 61st floor up to the 78th, found Judy Ween and the group she was with. Judy said he was running around putting out small fires or something with a fire extinguisher. And then he directed them to the stairwell, and he knew it was clear, so he'd go on down. And then apparently he went back in to, I guess, do a final check or something, and then made it all the way down to stay at the base in the lobby of the South Tower. That's where the Instant Command Center was. So.
And that's when the building had its total collapse.
We were told it came down in about 8.5 seconds.
Oh my goodness!
So there was no way they really, it was like, what's that funny noise, and then boom, Right. So at least he died with his boots on, and I'm forever grateful for that he was able to make his choices. He made all his own choices that day. And of course I wish he would have chosen to come home, but I know that was not Wells. He would never have done that.
What do you think he would say to you if he was here today? What do you suspect that he would say to you?
He'd probably...
No, this is very difficult.
He'd probably say, I know he'd say, I love you. And he said, he'd say, I had to do my job. I had to stay to help others. I know he would have said that.
Yeah. Now, the President of the United States, can you tell us what an honor he gave to your family and to Wells? And it was on the dedication?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that, please.
Well, when we met President Obama, actually for the second time at the dedication of the museum, the first time we met President Obama was when the Marines had gotten Osama bin Laden. And that happened actually on our 40th birthday, that happened, Osama bin Laden was killed on our 40th wedding anniversary, May 1st, our time. And our daughters said, Wells always would outdo us in the presents. He delivered a good one this time, right?
He did, right.
So President Obama on I believe it was May 5th, it was the following Thursday, came to what was the preview site for the 9/11 Museum. It wasn't finished yet, but there was a preview site, and there was a beautiful display there about Wells and his red bandana that is now on permanent display at the museum. So we were among a number of 9/11 families that had been invited to come and meet with the president. I almost threw out that invitation because it came on an email, and I'm like...
You weren't sure, right?
This has got to be a scam. What, from the White House coming? We need your social security number and your name and your, everything. I'm going, this is a scam. This is a scam. And I just was about to push the delete button when I looked at, there's the logo of the White House, the blue White House, and I looked at that and I went, oh,
look legit.
What the heck, and I said, so I responded, and thank goodness, because that was our first time meeting the president. And he was wonderful. He met with each family, went around to each table, came up to us and knew all about Wells. And he actually stopped by the display. We said, would you mind stepping over here so we could get a picture?
Oh, how nice.
Which was wonderful. And then I just had my moment. I said, and I have 2 bandanas here. Would you be able to just sign them for our daughters, one for each daughter? And he said, oh, he was surprised because we hadn't mentioned that. But he was very gracious and said, well, I need a special pen. So he did, and he wrote some beautiful, we won't forget Wells is what he wrote and signed. It was so
nice.
beautiful on both. So that happened. And then when the 9/11 museum dedication was happening, received a call from the organizers who said, Mrs. Crowther, are you planning to come to the museum dedication? I said, well, if we win the lottery, there was a whole lottery about
right,
if we win the lottery, yes. Well, okay, click. And then, this took about 5 phone calls to warm me up. They thought they should have just said it in the beginning, but
They should have said, you've won. And you'd say, I'm there.
well, the president actually chose Wells's bandana. They were offered a bunch of different artifacts to talk about.
Really?
And the president chose Wells's to speak about. And he was so eloquent. It was just really wonderful. I had a lengthy talk with his speechwriter so they could learn about Wells, and I'm still in touch with him today, Terry Shuplatt, lovely fellow. And so we were also told that the president was supposed to just speak for 3 minutes, but he went on for like 13 about Wells, right? A long time.
Did.
But the president can do what he wants. So that was really amazing. It was amazing. And so Ling Young very kindly, Judy Wynn's not stepped foot back in Manhattan since.
I can understand why.
Ling doesn't like to go, but she'd been going for treatment for burns and all sorts of things, and she'd never been back down to Ground Zero since. And bless her sweetheart, because it was for Wells, she agreed to come and be there when we met, and she said a few words, and I said a few words, and then we met the president, and there. It was just, it was such a huge honor.
Well,
Such
and
a
well
huge
deserved,
honor.
and a well
Thank you.
deserved honor.
Well, before we knew what happened to Wells, the part of the torment was, well, what do we do now? Here's this beautiful person. Does he just cease to exist and cease out of memory? And it was just a torment. And so to learn that he was able to make his choices that day and not be trapped in suffering like so many people were, and then to be recovered, and then to have this story come out, it's just amazing.
Well, you've chosen to look at the blessings, and you've chosen to go the positive route with this, which has helped so many people. And speaking of that, are there any words of wisdom that you could offer to other parents who may be suffering the tragic loss and the sudden loss of a child? And a child that could be of any age.
Any age. There is no pain greater. There's no pain greater than losing a child. And the only thing I can say is don't get stuck in an inward spiral, because that will kill you.
Yeah.
Try to focus outward. Try to find some outward way to bring good into the world in the memory of your loved one. It could be something very simple, even just going to do some volunteer work or something. Just turn your focus outward, because otherwise it's a death spiral for you.
Now you have done that so beautifully, and maybe you can talk a little bit for our viewers about what's happened here at Boston College in Wells' honor and really to its legacy.
Yes. Many beautiful things have happened here at Boston College. We're just so blessed that he was a student here. In fact, he said, I'm so happy here, Mom. At graduation, college should really be 7 years. And of course, we were just thrilled that we'd made it through 4 years of payments. But anyway, he was happy to stay 7. So I think he's here forever, which is a beautiful thing. He would want that. It first started with the Carney family making a very, very generous donation to endow the Wells R. Crowther Directorship of the Volunteer and Service Learning Center, which is at the core. Their work is at the core of Boston College's mission for men and women for others. It involves their students in service work and service learning and service activities. And so to have Wells's name
associated with such a
so
meaningful
beautiful
work.
So I came up when it was first started. Our daughter Paige was still here as a student, and because all our 3 children went here. so I came up to visit Paige, and I wanted to meet Dan Ponsetto, who is the new director of this. And Dan is wonderful. So
as is Kate. We have to do a little
yes, of
shout
course.
out as
I'm
well
sorry.
for Kate.
Well, I hadn't met Kate yet. I'm
Right.
not even sure. I'm not sure she had started working there yet. But absolutely, Kate Daly now, who's the associate director. Wonderful, 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 both of them. But at any rate, I went to meet Dan, and he said, "Well, what can we do for you?" I said, "Well, isn't this enough?" I looked around. I said, "This is fabulous." He said, "No, we can do more." So the idea kind of evolved, and he said, we'll do a run here, because Friends of Wells had been doing the New York Marathon, but that's a big commitment.
Yes.
So we'll do a 5K here, and that was the start of the Red Bandanna Run. And then Kate joined on, just a couple of years later, maybe 1 or 2 years later, and she's just worked hand in hand, so involved with this. And the two of them, the run has grown from 300, 350, 400 people over the years. The early years was slowly growing. Then the ESPN documentary came out about Wells that was actually produced by a friend of Wells's here at Boston College, classmate and friend.
Wow.
Yes, and so that ESPN documentary came out, and
Is that the one by Tom?
Tom narrated that, yes.
Yes.
But Drew Gallagher was the producer. Drew
Okay.
Gallagher was Wells's friend.
And Tom Rinaldi was the narrator.
Was the narrator, that's correct. And wrote the script. I mean, he wrote the dialogue. So so when that happened, it went from like 400 to 1,400 overnight, like boom, because it came out
Yes.
September 10th of that year, or
Yeah.
September 8th, earlier than September. They didn't come out on the 11th, they came out earlier. And suddenly, boom, up went, and of course, as is the spirit here at Boston College, well,
Yes.
this isn't a problem. This is going to be great, but how do we do it? I mean, they just have such a positive attitude, both
right,
of
to
them.
get it done.
So between the two of them, between Dan and Kate now regarding the run, they have everything organized. They've got these fabulous student volunteers. The last couple of years, it's been close to 2,000 runners have been, at least registered and contributing, and donors. I mean, it's just become our largest fundraiser for the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust, which we founded back in 2001. So, so that's happened. And then the athletic department kind of picked up on this, and they started having their service day game, Red Bandanna things, to involve Wells. It was mostly honoring servicemen, but also then Wells was brought into that to recognize other efforts as in service, and so that became huge. And the year, the first year, they've now called, I think they still call it the Service Day game, but it's kind of known as the Red Bandanna game.
Yes, yes.
And all the students, they have, I don't know, I think they give out 5,000 or 6,000 red bandanas. All the young people have them, and people in the stands have them. So that's fabulous every year. Now, what's also happened, and I guess I can show you this, the American Heroes Channel decided to talk to us about developing a program to recognize everyday heroes. And so we
Wonderful.
worked on it and consulted and thought, and we came up with the Red Bandanna Award. And where should it be given? Well, Boston College, of course. So BC was quite agreeable to this, and this is now given at the Service Day game, the Red Bandanna game. And the first awardee was a firefighter who in Minneapolis who'd been burned horribly and had to go to the burn unit and be treated for months, befriended children, and they each kind of helped each other heal. So he got out and he started Firefighters for Healing. And so that's happening. And the American Heroes Channel, it's a national campaign. The American Heroes Channel gives $10,000 to the winner's choice of charity. So that's kind of modeled on the Red Bandanna Service Award that we give here at Boston College,
Very
where
nice.
a student is chosen at their senior awards night to be given the service award for their track record, basically, of service while they're students here at Boston College. And that's been going on a very long time. That's, I think, in its eighth or ninth year, maybe. It's been going on a long time. So that's happened. And last year's winner was a veteran who had trained service dogs while he was in the service. And when he got out, he goes into animal rescue shelters and picks out dogs that are capable of being trained. He knows how to recognize them. He trains them, and then he gives them to veterans that need service companion service dogs. So he was the winner last year, which is great. We don't know who the winner is this year, but I think we're going to find out
very soon, right?
So that's a very special thing that's been happening.
Now there's also, we have a documentary play that we will be talking a little later with playwright Lisa. And also there is also a documentary. Can you tell us about the documentary?
Sure. A number of years ago, quite a number of years ago, my husband's a banker, and he met at a networking meeting or some such thing this very nice gentleman, Matthew Weiss. And Matthew said, I belong to a networking group. Would you like to come? He'd heard about Wells's story. They started talking about it. And he invited my husband to come speak at his networking group. And it was there he decided he was going to make a documentary. Very brilliant man. He's never made a documentary in his life. He's a lawyer. But he got started, and he hired wonderful cameramen, just invested tons of his own money, and went around following special programs here at Boston College. I think he went up to Canada. He sent them down to Florida for the UCF, University of Central Florida game that year, and just followed us around. So he's got wonderful footage from our lives and Wells's lives, and many interviews, and has also interviewed other survivors.
He has.
Yes, so it's not just about Wells. There are other people that are, he paints a very broad picture of from different viewpoints of what went on that day. So we're excited about that. And
is there a website people can visit? Do you have that?
If people can visit our website, crowthertrust.org, or there is on Facebook a Man in Red Bandana, spelled with one N, Man in Red Bandana Facebook page, so they can check that. The premiere of the film is going to be September 6th down in Rockland County in Suffern, New York, at the beautiful historic Lafayette Theater. But people can arrange, and there will be showings across the country, but people can actually arrange for their own screening in a local theater.
Oh, they can?
They can, and they can earn 5% of the ticket sales, which they can keep for themselves, or they can donate to a charity of their choosing. The Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust would be great, but I'm sure people have other other interests too, which is fine. We're all about supporting good works of other nonprofits. And they can visit tugg.com to find out about that.
That's wonderful. And we will be chatting with Lisa Rafferty in the program about her play as well.
Good. Can I just say something wonderful about Lisa?
Yes.
We met serendipitously. I always say Wells arranged this because we'd been invited down to the 9/11 memorial because the FDNY was giving a piece of steel from the Trade Center to the U.S. Lacrosse Foundation, based down in the Baltimore area, where they had developed a memorial for their lacrosse players that had been lost on 9/11. There were quite a lot of them. And so we were just down there standing by Wells's spot, visiting before we went to the ceremony. And up walks a firefighter, and he had the steel over his shoulder. He's carrying it. And so he kept, we talked a bit, and then he walked on. He recognized us. And I said, Jeff, maybe you should go help him or something. So my husband went off with him. I'm just standing there by Wells's spot, and I noticed there's a couple standing there too. So I said, did you lose anyone? Because usually, often you find someone else who's lost a loved one. And they said, no, did you? And I said, oh yes, my son, Wells Crowther, he died on 9/11. The husband said, Wells Crowther, the man in the red bandana.
He knew him right away.
I said, yes, how do you know? It was like, oh my, how do you know? And well, it turns out he is a Boston College alum, so that's why. What I didn't know was that his wife, Lisa Rafferty, was a documentary playwright. And her work is absolutely stunning. She goes and takes lengthy interviews and then has them transcribed, and that's how she builds her plays. So she was working on something for Betty Ford. She did something with the Boston Marathon bombing and shows the plays around. So, and she does them as fundraisers for the organization. So that was really, very
wonderful.
special. The last time I was standing at Wells's name, I was being interviewed for another project, and actually for the American Heroes Channel piece they're doing. And I noticed there was a couple just sort of standing waiting, and the photographers went off to take a long shot, and he walked up to me, he said, Mrs. Crowther? I said, yes. He said, I know about your son. He said, I lost my brother here on 9/11. He said, your son's story has gotten me through. What your son did got me through. And I thought, I just was so moved. I said, that's the first time I've ever heard anybody say that.
What a gift to you. I wanted to mention about another gift, I think. The gift of this book by Tom Rinaldi, The Red Bandanna, A Life, a Choice, a Legacy. It really is a beautiful book about your son's life, and I would highly recommend it.
Thank you.
Now, Tom Rinaldi is an ESPN correspondent, and he wasn't able to join us today, but he did have a few things to say.
Oh,
yes.
good.
So I'd like to read you what he had to write back to me when I had asked him a few questions. Of all the stories I've had the chance to share in my career,
none has resonated more than Wells' story. The reaction to the ESPN piece continues to this day. It's impossible to overstate my awe for Alison Crowther. To lose her son and remain as vibrant and open to life as she is a testament to her faith and spirit. As I've told her at times, Alison possesses a beautiful and rare combination, all inhabiting one heart: artistry, spirituality, and a supernatural sense all exist within her. Her strength is astounding and deeply moving. I've learned more from her in our many conversations than I can ever explain.
So what do you think of that?
Well, it's beautiful. Tom is such a special person. He has an enormous heart, and he has an enormous sensibility and sensitivity. He has a way of uncovering the dimensions of stories that he tells in many layers, and to me that's such a gift. You know, he really is he's brilliant. He's won many awards.
Yes, and this was a New York Times bestseller.
Yes, it was for 3 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, so yes. And he was so, before he even started working on this, because it was his first novel, or first biography, first long work, he just wanted to make sure that we were all right with him doing this, and he most wanted to honor Wells and honor us with this book and please us with this book. So that was his big focus, that we would be pleased with what he ended up writing. He took it so to heart, and he's just a very special gentleman, and I'm so honored. We are both, my husband and I, that we can call him friend.
Well, from what I just read, the feeling is very mutual, Alison.
Thank you.
So I wanted to close with just thanking you for being here, and really to add, as proud as you are of your son Wells, I feel certain that he is just as proud of you, of your husband Jeff, Paige in honor as well. And I really want to thank you for going back in time, which is a very painful thing to do, but you do this to keep his honor and legacy alive and to inspire young people, because I know you also go around the country speaking about his story so that you can offer to them a role model, a really positive role model in the world today.
Thank you.
So
I see that when I travel around the country, and also I traveled to Amman, Jordan. I was invited there to speak to leaders, academic, religious, business, and media leaders from 5 Arab countries. They wanted to know about Wells. They wanted to learn how to, and our Red Bandanna project, we've developed a curriculum to teach leadership and caring for others and other forgiveness, carpe diem, the power of one. And they wanted to understand this so that they can help their young people become more compassionate and caring of others. So when I go and I travel to schools in this country, I see these bright little faces, and there's just, you can hear a pin drop no matter the size of the audience. I can be talking to a classroom, or I can be talking to 500-600 children and students of all ages. And I always have the ESPN documentary played first before I talk, and that quiets everybody down and gets them focused to hear. But I know there's Wells's example is so inspirational to these young people. It's something they can honor and they can grab onto. Our daughter Honor, his sister, wrote a beautiful children's book called The Man in the Red Bandana, and it's very simple. It kind of focuses more on the heroics of the day rather than the devastation, because, as Honor said, she wrote it for her how to tell her young children about her brother. And she felt it was the parents of each child's responsibility or duty or to explain the more horrible parts of it. So it's a beautiful book. It's been praised by psychologists and parents of even very, very young children, 2, 3 years old.
What a
sometimes
wonderful gift
reading,
that she's given to the world
yes,
through this tragedy.
It's quite, it's quite special.
Well, thank you again, Alison.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure and an honor to have you with us.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we have an interview with Lisa Rafferty, the playwright who wrote a wonderful play based on Wells's experience on 9/11. Thank you. I'm here now with Lisa Rafferty. Lisa has created a documentary play based verbatim from interviews with over 25 people who were impacted by the heroic actions of Wells Crowther. Welcome, Lisa. Thanks for coming by SunnySpeak today.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Can you tell us about your play? First of all, the name of it, and how did you get the inspiration to create this work?
So it's called The Legacy of Wells Remy Crowther, the Man in the Red Bandana. And the inspiration came when my husband and I were at the reflecting pool of the South Tower on Veterans Day 2016.
Okay.
And we met Alison Crowther. She was standing near Wells's name. And because my husband is a Boston College graduate and my daughter is a senior here, will be a senior, of course, immediately we knew about Wells and about his story. So it was an incredible honor to meet Alison on that day. And she was there for a ceremony in honor of Wells. And we started talking about all the fantastic work that the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust is doing, and the Red Bandana Project. And she did not know at the time that she was talking to somebody who's a playwright and a director who most recently has been doing a lot of work in documentary theater. So I emailed her and I said, I'd really like to tell Wells's story in this genre. And she said, great.
Now, you interviewed 25 people, or more,
Yeah, it
right?
was more, right, yeah.
How long did this take you to put together, Lisa? This must have been quite a labor of love.
It was a labor of love. It was a labor of love. It's something, I know Alison speaks of this, and she and I are kindred spirits this way. I was being moved by forces greater than myself, for sure. We both felt it from the moment I met her, and we continue to feel it every day. And this is something I'm honored to do, and I feel compelled to do. So because I've been doing a lot of work in documentary theater, I was sort of able to quickly pull it together much faster than maybe I would have 2 or 3 years ago. So we sort of started the process in January, and by the end of April, we had interviewed everybody. And gotten, I use a lot of sources such as Tom Rinaldi's book, the ESPN documentary, other sources infuse the play verbatim. Again, verbatim.
Which is really important. So tell us when the play will be performed, and some specific, if people want to get specifics, is there a website?
Sure.
Can you share all that with us?
Yes. Okay. The benefit production will be Saturday, October 14th. It's the evening after the Red Bandanna 5K here at Boston College. So the Red Bandanna 5K is in the morning, and the benefit production is in the evening here at the Robsham Arts Center at 6:30 p.m. We don't have a website yet, but there is a Facebook page.
Oh, okay. And
so people couldn't find the Facebook page. I believe it's Legacy of Wells R. Crowther. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay, but people can Google that too to find
it.
Yeah,
if they go on Facebook and search for Wells Crowther, I'm sure it will come up. We'll be putting tickets on sale on September 1st, and all proceeds go to the Wells Remy Crowther Charitable Trust.
Well, Lisa, I really appreciate you stopping by to talk to us today about your wonderful work, and we wish you the best of luck with this production. You're quite a talented young woman.
Thank you.
So
Hope to see you there.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us today. We look forward to you joining us next time for another inspirational episode of SunnySpeak. Thanks for watching.